Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In my game, I have particular points at which the computer will roll the equivalent of a 20-sided dice, and then it will add a particular attribute to get a total, and then that total will determine what happens to the player. And I have noticed that the way that I've done this has a potential problem. And I want to spend the rest of the video talking about that potential problem and how I solved it and how that might be relevant to your own games. So let's get into the code. The way that I had it set up is that I would set Z to a number, and that number would be the number relating to the attribute, and then it would go to this page, roll and add, and it would generate a random number from 1 to 20, which was the dice roll, and then it would add the relevant slot from the AV array, which is the numerical value of a given attribute, and then it would total those. So for example, if I said set Z equal 5, that would be charisma, looking at this array, which is the names of the different attributes. That would be charisma, and it would get AV5 plus some random number from 1 to 20. Now, that's fine, but let's say that I wanted to add another attribute or get rid of an attribute. Let's say that I decided I wanted to have a luck attribute. I put that in there, and then I would have to increase this variable because that's the number of attributes. I'll just delete it so that I don't accidentally make a change. I would also need to go down to this array, which gives the maximum, or these arrays rather, which give the maximum and minimum values of the different attributes for the various races that the player can choose, and I'd have to insert the values relating to luck. But there's a potential problem in rolls, because let's say that I put luck in that slot there, which is slot 4, and let's say I have a point at which it says set Z equal to 5 and go to or include roll and add. Well, when I said set Z equal 5, I meant charisma, but now, because this is in here, slot 5 is constitution, and so the roll, it won't generate an error. The computer will be able to go, well, yes, I can see AV5, and that it will work. The program will still run, but the fiction of the game won't make sense, because presumably when you're rolling against charisma, it's some sort of test of how charming you are, or how plausible you are, or something like that, or how plausible the player character is. So why are we now rolling against constitution? And of course I could solve that by just putting anything new at the end. But what if I'm deleting an attribute? What if I decide, well, I'm not really using strength here, so I think I'll just delete that. Now everything's off by 1, except for what used to be rolls against size, which now won't have any value. And also, of course, I might have a particular reason for not putting an attribute at the end. I haven't done this in this case, but I might have wanted to put all the physical attributes first and all of the mental attributes next, or something, some other scheme like that, or I might have wanted to have them in alphabetical order or something, and so it might not sort of fit to put them at the end. So it seems that I need some sort of way of performing this operation that is going to be robust enough that if I change the initial values, if I add or delete attributes, it's still going to not just run, but it's going to do what I intended to do. And I'll show you how I did that. Instead of having a number, I now have it like this. I say set z equals capital SIZ, and then include roll and add as before. And when we go to roll and add, this is a special bit of code because there's particular points at which you're rolling and adding one attribute and minusing another. When you're sneaking around, dexterity makes you better at this, or at least it does at the moment, and size makes you less good. So don't worry about this bit. This is sort of what normally will happen. So what I have done is I set up a for loop, and it runs from 1 to an, which is to say the number of attributes, and then I say if atu, which is the variable that keeps track of where we are in the loop, if atu equals z, well, z is the string that we set up before we entered to roll and add. In this case, it'll be capital S, capital I, capital Z, or Z. And AT is the array which has the names of the attributes. So it'll scroll through looking at every one of these until it gets to one that matches the string that we've set up, in this case SIZ. And once it finds that, it will have a variable which is y, which is the random roll, the number from 1 to 20, plus AV, which is the numerical value of a given attribute, with the number u, i.e. the point where we are. And that's a little bit less efficient. It takes this, it's always going to have to go through this little loop. So it'll make the program slightly slower. But the good thing about that is, if I decide that I don't want size to be there, I want it to be over here for some reason, it'll still work. It'll still go through this loop. It'll just find it at the point where u is 4, rather than whereas before it would have been 7, and so it'll still be using the correct number, and we won't get any weird results where it seems like we should be using charisma, but it's for some reason using something completely different. And this is an example of a problem that you can run into when you're making a game, which is that you set up a system which, if you change it, requires you to go sort of through the game and change every number, right? Setting up that system took a while. Like it was inefficient in that it created work for me, and it's also inefficient in that it requires the game to do this series of operations which it didn't have to do before. All it had to do before was just this bit, basically, just that it would just be AVZ. But it's more efficient in that if I make any changes, I don't then have to go through the game and sort of fix every number and tweak every number. So the moral of the story, the point of the story, is that if you are setting up a system, and of course this is really for people who want to make a game that has fairly elaborate code. You may of course make a game that doesn't have a lot of code, and that's perfectly fine. As I've always said, you can make a game with Twine that just uses text and links, and it can be perfectly interesting and playable. But if you're making a game that uses a lot of code and you're setting up a particular system, ask yourself, okay, but if I wanted to change something, would this still work? And if the answer is no, is there a way that I can make it work slightly differently and perhaps slightly less efficiently, but be a bit more robust? Because if you do that, you'll give yourself the freedom to change the thing, and you may save yourself quite a lot of work. So I hope that that was interesting and or useful to at least some of you, and I hope that you will tune in next time.